Hello there, watching Al24 Midnight News coming to you live from Algiers, and to the headlines. The head of the UN support mission in Libya, Abdullah Batili, calls on Libya's neighboring countries to push for more support to end the political crisis in Tripoli. In occupied Palestine, hundreds of West Bankers were denied access to the occupied Al-Quds to perform the second Friday of Ramadan. And in Europe, as war rages in Ukraine, Turkey's parliament approved a bill to allow Finland to join NATO, clearing a way for the country to become part of the Western Defense Alliance. In the same line of thought, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko accused the West of preparing to attack and eliminate his country, warning of a potential of World War III. Hello again and welcome. I'm your host, Abdurrahim Kashur, and those were today's top stories. Starting from the African continent, the head of the UN mission in Libya, Abdullah Batili, said that the aim of his tour to Libya's neighboring countries is to back the work of the 5+5 Joint Military Committee in order to achieve the complete withdrawal of foreign fighters from the country. After being received in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, by the head of the Sovereignty Council, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Abdullah Batili stressed that achieving a full stability in Libya and advancing a political settlement must be done with involvement of neighboring countries.
Of the United Nations support mission in Libya. The objective of this visit is a follow-up of our work in Libya around the ceasefire agreement which has been implemented in Libya for some time now under the leadership of the 5+5 JMC.
In the same matter, UN envoy to Libya, Abdullah Batili, is making an official trip to Libya's neighboring countries as part of his efforts to restore peace and stability in the country, support the implementation of the ceasefire agreement, and speed up the withdrawal of foreign fighters, foreign forces, and mercenaries from Libya. Mohammed Khatou.
The Libyan crisis is steadily heading towards a breakthrough at the security level thanks to the relentless efforts that led to the agreement of the 5+5 Joint Military Committee on several axes that lay the basis for the long-awaited stability, including the unification of the military and security institutions and the contribution to the withdrawal of foreign fighters and mercenaries from the country. In support of those efforts and in consolidation of the progress achieved, the UN envoy to Libya, Abdullah Batili, is making an official tour to neighboring countries to restore peace and stability in the country.
The objective of this visit is a follow-up of our work in Libya around the ceasefire agreement which has been implemented in Libya for some time now under the leadership of the 5+5 JMC. International monitors are working with their national counterparts in Libya. So in Libya today we can say that the ceasefire agreement is holding. Further to that, there is a necessity to unify the security and military institutions in Libya to ensure stability and peace in Libya.
The tour began from Libya, Sudan, Chad and Niger and is aimed at supporting the 5+5 Joint Military Committee in implementing the ceasefire agreement and speeding up the withdrawal of foreign fighters, foreign forces and mercenaries from Libya. Batili stressed that stability in Libya requires the involvement of neighboring countries and the whole region.
It is important that all the countries cooperate to implement this situation, this objective of the withdrawal of foreign fighters and mercenaries. so that not only peace and stability will be returned to Libya, but also in the neighboring countries.
Batili's last step comes in a context of stabilizing the situation in the country amid international and popular insistence on the need to use elections as the only way to resolve the Libyan crisis.
Civilian and military parties in Sudan will sign the final political agreement on Saturday, pending the signing of the agreement on the constitution on the 6th of this April, paving the way for formation of civilian government on the 11th of the same month. Civilian and military parties are working in earnest to complete discussions on the details on the final agreement to bail Sudan out of its crisis and to reach a unified and professional army far from politics, or rather polities, and all that was stated in the political agreement signed last December the 5th.
The discussions will continue, and if there is any development, the civilian and military forces that signed the framework agreement will meet to take a decision and inform public opinion through official communication channels.
Ugandan troops operating as part of an East African regional military force arrived in the Democratic Republic of Congo Friday, joining Kenyan and Burundian commissioner to supervise a planned pullback of M23 rebels. The Ugandan contingent of the EAC force entered the Congolese town of Bunagana on Friday morning, according to official sources in the country. 10 years after silencing the guns, initiative was approved by the African Union to settle the continent's dispute and political crises on Thursday. The UN Security Council organized a high-level debate on peace and security in Africa and the impact of development policies in embodying the initiative. Marwa Blair.
Several countries in Africa continue to be conflict-ridden by factors that are driven by chronic political instability, ethnic divisions, and exploitation by terrorists and armed groups, which led the African Union to ratify the Silence in the Guns initiative. It is a flagship agenda of African Union's Agenda 2063 that aims to put end on all conflicts and wars and prevent genocide in the continent.
The topic of this important debate is timely. It is coming at a moment when Africa is faced with multiple challenges that put at risk the attainment of the noble objectives of silencing the guns, even by the new date of 2030. The causes of these challenges are historical, constitutional, institutional, economic, social, and cultural. They relate also to the impact of climate change.
On his part, the president of Mozambique, Filipe Nyusi, who chaired the meeting, told council members that the global terrorism threat remains critical.
The leaders of our nations have an added responsibility because they have the obligation to mobilize all sensitivities and secure the requisite means and resources at their disposal to fast-track the silencing of the guns once and for all.
The Chinese government has bet on the success of the initiative in restoring security and stability to the African continent if external interferences in the internal affairs of its countries were stopped.
Africa knows its conditions and African countries can guarantee security and peace. The international community should adhere to the principle of African solutions to African problems. It should provide assistance on the basis of respect and trust, instead of interfering in the affairs of African countries on the grounds of human rights and seizing opportunities for African transformation.
Armed groups loom large across the continent, and the extremist violence threatened to spread to even more countries. African Union leaders adopted this Silence in the Guns initiative for an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa. Yet, the initiative is still facing numerous challenges.
Tunisia has affirmed its firm commitment to back the Palestinian people in order to achieve their legitimate aspirations for self-determination and establishment of the independent state. This came in a statement issued by the Tunisian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the occasion of the 47th anniversary of Land Day. Meanwhile, Tunisia expressed its deep concern at the repeated attacks on Palestinian civilians in a deliberate violation of UN resolutions and human rights charter. In the same line of thought, Zionist occupation forces on Friday imposed repressive measures on thousands of Palestinians to cross into AlAqsa for the second Friday prayers of Ramadan in AlAqsa Mosque. But despite that, as many as 250,000 Palestinian Muslims worshippers prayed at AlAqsa Mosque compound in the occupied Al-Quds on the second Friday of the holy month of Ramadan. European Union official visiting Lebanon said on Friday that the bloc will increase its humanitarian assistance to the crisis-struck country, but that more significant long-term aid depends on reforms and a deal with the International Monetary Fund. EU Commissioner for Crisis Management also said that at a news conference following his two-day visit that Lebanon needs to elect a president in order to get out of the crisis, which would resolve a presidential vacuum that has dragged on for 5 months, and to ink a deal with the IMF.
This country needs more. This country needs reforms. This country needs political consolidation. This country needs election of a president. This country needs a government with full powers in place, and this country needs an agreement with the international community, specifically with the International Monetary Fund, and such an agreement would unlock substantial financial support, also from the European Union, that should help Lebanon recover from the current difficult situation.
Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg praised the Turkish Parliament ratification of the protocol for Finland's accession to NATO, predicating that Finland would formally join the alliance with days. He tweeted that he looked forward to raising the flag of Finland at NATO headquarters in the coming days, ahead of the meeting of NATO foreign ministers on April 4 and 5 in Brussels. Hussein Burkan.
Finland's accession to NATO appears imminent, following the Turkish parliament's long-awaited ratification of the protocol. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg described the move as strengthening the NATO family, with Finland set to become the alliance's 31st member and the country with 1,300 kilometers land border with Russia.
I welcome the vote by the Turkish Grand National Assembly to ratify Finland's membership in NATO. All 30 NATO allies have now ratified the accession protocol. And I have just spoken with President Sauli Niinistö to congratulate him on this historic occasion. Finland will formally join our alliance in the coming days.
With all 30 NATO allies now having ratified the accession protocol, Niinistö thanked the 30 NATO member states for the support for Finland's accession, with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson also offering congratulations and describing Finland's membership as beneficial to common security.
After the ratification of the NATO membership application in the Turkish parliament last night, they will soon become full NATO members. We started this important journey together 1 year ago, immediately after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Sweden and Finland will both make the alliance stronger.
Analysts believe that Turkey's ratification of Finland's request will add new strength to NATO, as Finland's accession may open the door to many changes in the region.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin has approved a new version of Russia's concept of foreign policy. The document defines the priority areas, goals and objectives of the country's international activities. Nabil Khazini.
In an epoch of fast global change, Russia deemed it is time to change the doctrine of its foreign policy. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed the 42-page document for a new roadmap of the Russian diplomacy, where in its main points Moscow designates the United States as the greatest threat facing the country. Russia would use its armed forces to repel or prevent an armed attack on its territory or that of its allies. The Russian vision identifies China and India as key partners for the future.
In particular, the unprecedented level of international tension over the past decade is stated. The existential nature of threats to the security and development of our country created by the actions of unfriendly states is recognized. The United States is directly named as the main initiator and conductor of the anti-Russian line, and in general, the policy of the West aimed at the all-round weakening of Russia is characterized as a hybrid war of a new type.
The new concept made no mention of Ukraine at all, but in an atmosphere of escalating conflict-related disputes in Ukraine and their repercussions pushed Russia to boost political and economic ties with several countries, particularly China. Moscow and Beijing seek to build an alternative for non-Western alliance in the world. Russia aims to support its allies and partners in ensuring their security and sustainable development regardless of their international recognition.
In practical terms, I ask all colleagues involved in the implementation of common foreign policy to pay special attention to expanding ties with constructive partners and creating conditions for unfriendly states to abandon their hostile policy towards our country.
The adoption of this new strategy confirms the deep gap that has been existing between Russia and Western countries since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine.
European Union's top diplomat Josep Borrell said on Friday that China cannot be a mediator in Ukraine's war as it is on one side, but could play the role of facilitator to reach a peace deal with Russia. Let's take a listen.
It is clear that China should use its great influence on Putin to speed up the diplomatic negotiation. China cannot be a mediator because it is on one side, but it can be a facilitator.
The issue of sending peacekeeping forces to Ukraine, which was previously avoided, is now being discussed among European Union countries. According to Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, the only question remaining is the specifics, or rather the specifics of the deployment, such as the number of tanks, aircrafts or missiles containing uranium elements. In the same line of thought, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko Friday called for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine and for talks to start on lasting peace settlement. The Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko also said that Russia could, if necessary, to put intercontinental nuclear missiles in Belarus.
It's still possible right now for a peaceful resolution. On the other hand, if Ukraine is stuffed with Western weapons, there is no more Soviet weapons left there. If the Ukrainian military goes through retraining and there is also an armada on the other Russian side, then we will see not 500,000 killed and maimed, but more. Therefore, we must stop this now, before any escalation begins.
Also, Belarusian president accused the West of preparing to attack and eliminate his country, warning of a potential for a third world war. In response, Lukashenko has expressed his willingness to receive Russian strategic nuclear weapons and tactical weapons that Moscow is preparing to send to Minsk.
I must say Putin and I will decide and introduce here, if necessary, strategic weapons, and they must understand this from the scoundrels abroad who today are trying to blow us up from inside and outside. We will stop at nothing to protect our countries, our state and their peoples.
Russia has protested about provocative actions by U.S. armed forces in Syria. TASS news agency cited senior Russian officials as saying that incidents had occurred in the northeastern province of Hasakah. Russia, head of Russian Reconciliation Center for Syria, told TASS that U.S. forces had twice been spotted in areas which lay outside the agreed zones. U.S. President Joe Biden has called on Russia to release Ivan Kershikov, a Wall Street Journal reporter arrested earlier this week on espionage charges and facing 20 years in jail. Russia's Federal Security Service has accused Kershikovich, a U.S. citizen, of trying to obtain a classified information. It is the first time an American journalist has been detained in Russia on accusations of spying since the Cold War. No individual or force can hold China back from achieving the goal of national reunification. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said that in Beijing on Friday. Spokeswoman made the comments at a press briefing in response to an inquiry about the so-called transit of Taiwan leader through the United States.
We have time and again made our position clear on this so-called transit for Tsai Ing-wen to go to the US. China firmly opposes any form of official interaction between the United States and the Taiwan region. We firmly oppose any visit by leader of the Taiwan region to the United States in any name or under whatever pretext. And we firmly oppose the US government having any form of contact with the Taiwan authorities.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced on Friday that the United Kingdom has reached an agreement to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership after leaving the European Union. Sunak stated that being the first European country to join this agreement enhances the UK's position in the global economy and creates opportunities for innovations, growth and job creation. The agreement exempts over 99% of British goods exports from customs duties and provides protection for important British industries and entities, including agriculture, national health services, livestock and food safety standards. And now for more international news, let's follow this roundup.
Indonesia and Russia on Friday signed an extradition agreement which they believe will enhance cooperation in combating transnational crime that appears to be a turning point relation. The treaty, the first ever extradition agreement that Indonesia has with a country on the European continent, was signed by Indonesian Law and Human Rights Minister Yasona Lawli and his Russian counterpart Konstantin Choichenko. 11 people were killed in a stampede during the distribution of food aid in the southern Pakistani city of Karachi on Friday. According to the state's police department, the dead included 5 women and 3 children, with another 5 people were hospitalized with injuries from the rush of people at a charity disruption site at a factory.
More than 120 wildfires raged in Spain's northern Asturias region on Friday, as emergency services stated. Asturias blazes come on top of another wildfire still burning 9 days after it started in woodlands in the eastern Valencia region, and yet another that has swept through 1,100 hectares of land in Galicia in the northwest. Spanish Guardia Civil said on Friday they evacuated 300 people overnight in the northern region. Police fired tear gas as a couple thousand people marched in the streets of the western French city of Nantes to denounce what many said was the excessive use of force by police in the country's recent wave of protests. 2 men are in a coma after violent clashes between protesters and police during an unauthorized demonstration during which 2 police vehicles caught fire, as the television footage showed.
The French Football Federation instructed referees not to stop games during the holy month of Ramadan to allow Muslim players to break their fast. According to multiple media reports, the French Football Federation claimed in an email sent to referees on Thursday that this act violates the French Football Federation regulations, in a contrast to the English Premier League, which permits it. It is prohibited by the rules, according to Eric Borghini, head of the Federal Referee Commission at the Federation, who also emphasized the strict adherence to secularism in football principle. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for being with us in this late hour. For more updates, you can follow our social media platform. And all I can say at the end, good night.